Today we're going to be going over the M4 Mac Mini, released in late 2024. I'm going to be doing a quick unboxing, and then we'll be going through some real-world use case scenarios and performance, and at the end I'll sum it all up. All right, let's get into it. Growing up in the 90s, it seemed like whenever a new piece of technology was released, it doubled the possibility of what we previously knew. Now it seems like maybe once or twice a decade we get something that really pushes the industry forward in a way by either breakthrough performance or by creating a new value which we were led to believe wasn't even feasible. In 2011, Intel did it with their Sandy Bridge processors, which brought consumer CPUs pro-level performance at an amazingly obtainable price. But we're here to talk about Apple. Once an industry pioneer, it seemed as though everything they released was new and groundbreaking, leaving the industry to copy in their wake of success. The first iPod was released in 2001, leaving everyone to copy, putting a lowercase I in front of every product. First iPhone was released in 2007, the first usable touchscreen, which would change the cell phone industry forever. The iPad released in 2010, but it seems as though Apple had lost their edge. Android overtook Apple in 2012. Apple hadn't released much to push the industry as they once did. That was until 2020, when Apple released their new in-house silicon. And that brings us to today. Seems as though they did it once again in 2024 with their new M4 Mac Mini. For the first time that I can remember, Apple has an outstanding product for both value and performance. This thing either looks like a Apple TV that's been overfed or a mini Mac Studio. We have two USB-C ports on the front. On the back, we have a HDMI. We still have Ethernet, but the base model requires a upgrade, an extra $100 charge for the 10 gigabit power cord and three USB or USB 4, and the big change, the controversy, the power button is now on the bottom instead of the back. But I would imagine that most people just leave this thing on all the time and it'll automatically sleep. The only way this thing cools is through the bottom. So there's a intake and then the exhaust out the back. And in the box, the only thing we have are probably warning labels and a power cord. All right, now that we're done with the overview, let's take a look at what I uncovered with the testing and performance of it. So, is it good at gaming? The short answer is no, absolutely not. As you can see here, I have 260 some games in my library, and only 43 of them are Mac compatible. So if you can find a game that will run on it, how does it run? Well, I played some Vampire Survivors. I was really hoping that Deep Rock was available. Granted, that game still is in development, but sadly it is not. So I played some Vampire Survivors, and with VSync on at 4K, there's no other graphics options other than frame limit or not. For the most part, it is a very playable experience at 60 frames per second. As the game gets like crowded and out of control, it will drop to like the 50s and stuff, but at that point the game like You don't even notice it. It doesn't feel like it's chugging. It's just the frame rate is going down. And trying to play it uncapped to see how it would perform. The game actually locked up in the menu at my native monitor refresh rate, and the whole computer locked up. I couldn't like force quit out or anything. Literally, it just sat there frozen for a few minutes. And as I was trying to figure out how to force quit, in Mac, the PC restarted and then it tried to open all the applications again. I actually had a hard time logging in. My keyboard wasn't connecting. And eventually I got logged in and tried booting everything back up, and the game was like trying to load, but it was frozen. And fortunately the computer was working again, so I just force closed out of it. So overall, performance and lack of compatibility still leave, I think, Mac completely irrelevant in the gaming space. I'm sure for casual gaming and maybe some like native app store games, like essentially like cell phone gaming, I'm sure it's fine. But just from like a Steam user experience, it is basically irrelevant. So now that I've had some time to use it, I've probably got like 100 hours of use on this thing. And I haven't run into really any issues with memory for me. I do basic video editing. I don't do any gaming on it. And I'll have like a couple applications in Windows up. And I've never had an issue with running out and running into swap memory. With my old M1, I definitely did. That had 8 gigs of memory, and I would do the same things with it. But video editing, I would constantly be, that thing would be just chugging and locking up. For the most part, in video editing, I haven't had any issues with the timeline, other than once after like a 4-hour video editing session, the application essentially froze. So what would happen is like I would play it, my preview would just freeze. It would sometimes display like the preview frame that I clicked on in the timeline, but then when I'd go to play, there would be no preview output, but it was running. You could see it like counting down the timeline, and you could hear the audio, but no preview. And then I actually tried to close the application, and it just locked up and froze. I let it sit for a couple of minutes, and I checked system resources, and the application just froze. So I had to force quit it. Luckily, all my progress was saved. Final Cut seems to do a pretty good job as far as actually saving the progress as you're working, because I've never like actually like clicked save project. I just like close out. And Final Cut is a very I would say efficient program. So you can see just my mic, the Wavelink software is using a ton of resources compared to like anything else on my computer. Like 10% of my CPU is just the Wavelink software. So a lot of the Apple magic is in that like first party ecosystem. So let's take a look at the Mac Mini and do some comparisons. So the base model Mac Mini, I think, is an outstanding value for what it is. Any additional upgrades, I strongly think it's not worth it unless you go with the Mac Pro. So, for example, you get the same CPU in all three of these base model Mac Minis, but the jump in price. It's I think Marquez said it best, where Apple's got this ladder system where each upgrade is just like one more like rung of the ladder until eventually it gets built out of control. They've upgraded the memory to 16 gigabytes from 8, which is fantastic. For most users, I think that is enough, and that is what I stuck with. I also stuck with the standard storage. I use external hard drives because the internal storage memory cost is out of control. Like, I'm not sure what these numbers are from, but 2 terabytes for $800, like, I think that was the price of like an SSD when they were like SATAs in like 2012. So that's insane. The only thing I could really think of is if you're running a NAS, the $100 for the 10 gigabit Ethernet is probably worth it. Other than that, instead of doing any upgrades, I personally think that if you are at the point where you think that you need them, where you're thinking that, hey, 16 gigs isn't enough memory, and you're thinking either 24 or 32, and because of that, you're probably going to need more storage, I personally would just recommend going with the Pro. So this is $1,000 for this setup. And this is what I'm talking about with this like ladder system. So you're like, okay, $1,000. So an extra $400, you get the Pro, which is a better CPU. So you get more cores, more performance, and more efficiency cores. There's also a CPU upgrade here too. So you can get the bigger chip as well. But so stepping up to the M4 Pro chip, it also bumps up your memory. So you get 24 instead of the 16. So it's like a $200 value. And then they double your hard drive space to 512, which I think is probably the bare minimum of like most users actually should get. 256 is just too small in my opinion. Either way, I think you're going to need to get more hard drive space. So like external hard drives is what I use. The memory is like a third of the price. So you could get a 2 terabyte external SSD from like Amazon or Costco, for example, for literally like $250. So the value is just awful. I mean, it would be really nice to have all the storage like built into it, but I just think that the value isn't worth it. And you still do have to pay for the additional 10 gigabit Ethernet. But at least with the Pro chip, you do get a little bit more hard drive space and more memory. And I think that if you're worried about that being an issue, you should probably be looking at the Pro anyway. But instead of like fully decking out a M4 Pro chip, I think that the new Mac Studio is going to be coming out sometime this year. Once again, the ladder system, that'll probably be introduced at $2,000, which will probably have 48 gigs of memory standard, plus a better CPU and possibly more storage or the same. I'm not sure. And then you'd have more ports as well. The other thing that is to note is you get Thunderbolt 5 instead of Thunderbolt 4 ports. So all the ports, the amount of ports are the same from the base to the Pro chip, but they're Thunderbolt 5, which I don't even have any devices like that. I guess it would be a little bit more future proof. I honestly think that Thunderbolt 4 seems to be fine. I mean, I do video editing right off my drives. To sum things up, the entry-level Mac Mini is fantastic. At $600, it's the cheapest entry point into the Mac ecosystem. I think that the performance is fantastic for this price point. It costs as much as most modern day graphics cards, and what it's capable of is honestly pretty amazing. The upgrade from the first generation Apple Silicon to the fourth generation is huge. I just don't think that the entry level is suitable for a professional workload other than maybe photo editing. But I don't really think that anyone is expecting it to be at $600. So I would like to get my hands on the Pro chip to see if that thing really is the powerhouse that people are claiming it is. But honestly, I'm holding off and waiting until the Mac Studio gets a re-release for the M4. We haven't seen one since the M2, and it's about time. I'm sure if this is any indicator of what we can expect, it's going to be fantastic. So if you've made it this far, I just want to say thanks. I appreciate it. And if you're looking for some accessories for your new Mac, maybe you check out a video here maybe.